And welcome to the Maryland Public Service Commission's administrative meeting for September 16th, 2020. The commission will come to order. Obviously, the coronavirus has altered our way of life and the way that we'll be continuing forward in the at least months to come. Today marks the six-month anniversary of our altered operations, like so many other businesses both in the state and around the country. But within a week of March 16th, when this pandemic closed our offices, the resilience of the PSC employees sprung into action, and we were able to restore operations within a week. I'd like to commend many of our staff who have since returned to the office, particularly the forward customer-facing staff that are reporting to duty every day, along with the staff that remains on telework status. Those staff that continue to go to our offices in 6 St. Paul Street include the Consumer Affairs Division, the Transportation Division, our IT folks, our fiscal folks, dockets, procurement, our OGC administrative assistants, and of course, our engineers that are in the field every day. I think back to the inspectors that were on site during the Labyrinth Road explosion in early August, spending several days at that unfortunate incident in very hot temperatures. And our employees do that because they serve the public and they believe in public service. So I want to recognize their work at this 6-month anniversary. It's hard to believe that amount of time has passed. At the same time, in response to the COVID-19 pandemic, the Commission has taken a number of actions to balance the needs of our public utilities with the needs of utility customers in furtherance of the public interest. I've stated before that we are not the ratepayer advocate, and the state is lucky to have a ratepayer advocate in Paula Carmody and her team of experienced attorneys and staff. And she does a fine job in zealously representing the interests of residential ratepayers. However, COVID-19 issues will remain on the forefront of all of our agendas for the near term. After our PC 53 conference that we had at the end of August, we've more recently issued a notice soliciting proposals and ideas for arrearage management programs. Those proposals are due 3 weeks from today on October the 7th. However, since we've taken our emergency action back on August 31st, we've seen a number of very, very positive outcomes. The director of the Office of Home Energy Programs has committed to addressing the applications that are now coming in his door in response to the Commission's action. In all 24 counties around the state, we've seen an increase in application activity since the Commission made its determination. Last week, we heard from Deborah Brown of the Maryland Fuel Fund, and she provided us with an update where she's seen more activity, and they've moved forward with their Thrive to 45 public service campaign. It was very good to hear from the Fuel Fund. Additionally, our utilities are moving forward. We've seen double-digit increases in call center volume in terms of customers now contacting their utilities to either check on their balances, to engage the utility in a repayment plan, or to determine what resources are available. I'm happy to announce that our largest utilities in the state, including Baltimore Gas and Electric, Pepco, and Delmarva Power, are about to kick off their public service announcements and campaign titled We Can Help. We Can Help the Ratepayers. And this campaign will be aired both in print, television, newspapers, radios, and social media spots. So that campaign will be forthcoming. I'm happy to see that the utilities are acting on the commitment they provided the Public Service Commission during the 3 days of hearings, and we're looking forward to the responses. Overall, I believe that the state and its ratepayers are in good shape as we move forward, as the Commission's initial moratorium is set to expire on October 1st, with other activities occurring between now and then. And as I said at our last PC 53 hearing, that further commission action is forthcoming. In other news, solar development in the state of Maryland has received a great deal of attention lately. Many of you recall that under the Clean Energy Jobs Act of 2019, the state has embarked on an aggressive timetable towards receiving 50% of its energy from renewable resources by the year 2030. That law took effect last October, and it also mandates that we receive 14.5% of our energy needs from solar. The fact that solar siting and permitting has been a topic of great interest is not surprising. Land use issues, concerns with NIMBY-related issues are ones that we've seen before. Obviously, agricultural land and the development and redevelopment of that land is contentious. Removing trees and forests to install new utility-scale solar panels is also contentious. That is partly the reason why the governor last year created a special task force to look towards better renewable energy development and siting, both solar projects and wind projects. And the PSC was fortunate to have a seat on that task force. The development of solar in this state is important, particularly utility scale, and it's critical if the state is going to move forward with its policies on a clean energy future. And this is complemented, I think, to a larger degree by the regional efforts that we have to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions and improve the emissions in the transportation sector. When it comes to siting these renewable energy projects, the PSC has final siting authority involving large-scale generation facilities in the state of Maryland. And it goes without saying that the Commission takes this responsibility very seriously. As the state's highest court ruled just last year in the perennial solar case, we are the ultimate decision maker when it comes to issuing the siting approvals. And with limited exception, all solar projects greater than 2 megawatts must first seek PSC approval by way of obtaining a certificate of public convenience and necessity. And that's a process that's governed by both the Public Utilities Article and Commission regulations. Overall, I believe that the Commission has a tried and true process that has remained somewhat efficient over the years. And since 2011, the PSC has approved over 35 CPCNs for utility scale solar projects across the state, from the Eastern Shore to the Panhandle. And we do that after conducting a fact-based evidentiary hearing where we have the opportunity to hear from both the developers, interested parties, and of course our counterparts and local and county officials. It's a very comprehensive process. But in spite of this comprehensive process that accompanies each CPCN application, the Commission is always continually looking at ways to improve that process, to make it more clear and to make it all more transparent for the benefit of all parties. And I do recognize that some concern has been aired lately regarding the pace of solar development in Maryland, and more specifically, the perceived delays that are accompanied by the permitting process, which involves a number of state agencies in addition to the PSC, particularly the Department of Natural Resources Power Plant Research Program and the Maryland Department of the Environment. However, with that concern comes an opportunity for us to be proactive and to provide additional clarity and transparency regarding our CPCN application requirements, particularly those surrounding what it means to have an application that is deemed complete. Apparently, there's some lack of clarity regarding that determination. To that end, in the near future, we'll be issuing a notice of proposed rulemaking to address certain additional CPCN requirements. That rulemaking will be docketed and noticed, and without prejudging what will be in that rulemaking, the Commission is going to invite interested stakeholders and parties to file their own comments and proposals. And that forthcoming notice will provide instructions on how the parties are to submit those proposals and on what timeline they will be received. Ultimately, I think this is an opportunity for all interested stakeholders to address a concern that's been voiced with regard to the movement and speed of our permitting process. I would encourage these parties to reach out and work not only with each other, but with Commission staff, with your local county officials and zoning authorities. And in that method, we could work towards finding a common ground, which would also advance the interests of the state in getting towards that 50% renewable goal by 2030, which is less than 10 years away. So stay tuned for announcement of that notice in the near future. I do have a personnel announcement to make today. One of our fine accountants in the accounting division, Yulia Poboriski, will be departing the Commission in the next week. She has been working with the Accounting Investigations Division for the past 9 years, working on countless rate cases, stride cases, and in fact, I just saw her testifying last week on the Colombia gas rate case before Judge Lawrence. So she is working to her very last day. While it's a loss for this commission, Yulia's talents will be retained by the state of Maryland, where she will be working for the Office of the Comptroller as an assistant state comptroller in the Office of Revenue Administration. Yulia, we thank you for your 9 years of service to the Public Service Commission, and we wish you well as you begin your tenure with the Office of the Comptroller. I'll pause there to see, and I see Commissioner Linton clapping, and I that's it. Turn to my colleagues. Commissioner O'Donnell.
I just wanted to associate with all of your previous remarks, but especially wish Ms. Poboriski fair winds and following seas. It's been a pleasure, I think, for all of us to work with her and her professionalism. And Julia, have fun down at the Comptroller's office. We'll see you soon, I'm sure.
Thank you. With that, we have minutes to approve from the September 9th, 2020 meeting. The vote begins with Commissioner Herman.
Aye.
Commissioner Linton.
Aye.
Commissioner O'Donnell.
Aye.
And Commissioner Richard.
Aye.
I vote aye. The minutes are approved. Mr. Secretary.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. There are 3 items on today's consent agenda. Item number 1 is an interconnection agreement amendment from Verizon Maryland LLC and Lumos Networks LLC. Item 2 is the application of Cheap Energy Now LLC for a license to supply natural gas or natural gas supply services in Maryland. And item number 3 is the application of Christian Exteriors LLC for a license to supply electricity or electric generation services.
Thank you. Seeing no questions from the commissioners, I move that with respect to item number 1, that we approve the interconnection agreement amendment 10 days after a 30-day comment period unless adverse comments are filed. With respect to item number 2, that we grant the company a license to operate as a natural gas supplier in Maryland, limited to broker services for the customer classes and service territories applied for and recommended by staff. That we direct the company to provide marketing materials specific to Maryland operations to Commission staff and Office of People's Counsel 30 days prior to using the materials in Maryland, and direct the company to file notice with the Commission within 30 days of any changes to the information in the application. And with respect to item number 3, that we grant the company a license to operate as an electricity supplier in Maryland, limited to broker services for the customer classes and service territories applied for and recommended by staff, and direct the company to file notice with the Commission within 30 days of any changes to the information in its application. The vote begins with Commissioner Herman.
Aye.
Linton.
Aye.
Commissioner O'Donnell,
Aye.
and Commissioner Pritchard.
Aye.
Aye, the motions are. Mr. Secretary, let's move to the administrative agenda.
Mr. Chairman, item number 4 on today's administrative agenda, which was deferred from September 2nd, 2020, is the application of the Washington Suburban Sanitary Commission for a license to supply natural gas and natural gas services in the state of Maryland. On this item for staff, we have Nan Zhang and Lloyd Spivak. For the commission, the Sanitary Commission, Bert Wilson and David Beulgemans.
Thank you. We've continued this item from the September 2nd administrative meeting. Do the parties have any additional information to provide or update before we turn to commissioner questioning?
Staff does not have anything further, but we are available for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Spivak. I expect you'll get some. We'll turn to Commissioner Linton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning, everyone. I would like to thank all the parties for coming back today to answer a few additional questions on this topic. As I mentioned the last time this item was brought before the commission, I saw this as a fairly unique application in all of the years of attempting to develop the competitive market in Maryland. This is the first time we've had, to my knowledge, it's the first time we've had a state agency that's attempted to apply for a license. So I wanted to take a little time to consider the short-term and long-term implications of granting a license to a state agency in light of the fact that licenses once granted are fairly rarely removed from the parties that obtain them. And in fact, there are many companies today that have licenses that predate this current bench and even many of our existing staff members. So I wanted to make sure that we considered how our regulations and the statute design in general would impact a state agency having a license and just exactly how we would administratively function under it. A lot of my concerns are buffered by the fact that we have a very capable and knowledgeable applicant in WSSC. And so I do still have a few questions. First, for WSSC, if the last hearing we were at a few weeks ago, you acknowledged that this license was being obtained for the purpose of providing supply to yourself, but perhaps also to other state agencies in the future. I was wondering if you could just clarify that a little for me to let me understand when you say other state agencies, are you talking about all of them, or just is this something that's just hypothetical at this point?
Sure. Thank you very much, Commissioner Linton. So the plan is at this point for WSSC to self-supply. I think the intent is that eventually WSSC could market gas to select government entities. I think that the actual target market is more local government entities than the state government. But in order to be able to do that and to enter into any contracts, if a license is required, it needs to be obtained before doing that. So like other suppliers that are, or other companies or entities that are looking to enter into the market, we're applying for a license now for the eventuality of potentially doing that. But at this point, again, no customers have been identified, nobody's been signed up because we're waiting for this license.
Okay. So just so that I understand the record's clear and I understand it then. So you're suggesting that within the service territory that a license would be offered, WSSC would be competing against any other licensed supplier that might also be attempting to get that same contract with a local government.
Correct.
Okay. And thank you, Mr. Beulgemans. For our staff, is that your understanding? Is that something that you believe is part of the overall regulatory structure that we have now for, and statutory structure that we have now for the market? Mr. Spivak, your mic is still muted.
Excuse me. When you say that, are you referring to the possibility of licensing a government agency?
Licensing a government agency, and then the possibility that they would be competing in the market the commission has developed over the last 2 decades.
I don't think they were specifically envisioned as being part of that market, but I think I don't think they were necessarily excluded either. I think it was more probably an issue that wasn't particularly contemplated one way or the other. And I mean, given a choice here, I mean, remember that if the commission were to say, no WSSC, you are not a person that needs to be licensed by the commission to engage in gas, you're not saying, you wouldn't be necessarily preventing them from doing it. You would be saying that some form of sovereign immunity prevents them from being required to have a license, but they could still go out and make that and act in the way they're intending to act at that point. You would simply be saying that they don't need a license to do it because they're a government agency.
I do have one additional point, Commissioner Linton, if I may.
Sure.
One important thing to note about what WSSC is planning on doing here is the intent is to supply, either self-supply or some select customers with gas that will be generated from one of their facilities that produces effectively renewable natural gas. So I guess it is true that in some ways they would be competing against traditional gas suppliers, but it would be from this limited source. So the intent here isn't for WSSC to become like a full range, typical gas supplier. It's really for this limited purpose. I just wanted to clarify that. It kind of came to mind as Mr. Spivak was answering your question.
Sure, thank you, and I appreciate that. Mr. Spivak, you've had an opportunity, I'm sure, to look at our regulations and over the course of that are in our regulations currently in COMAR. Do you see any areas where either now or sometime in the future the commission may have some challenge or question about how to regulate another state agency under our existing regulations? A licensed state agency.
Not at this juncture. And I think, all of the commission's licensing jurisdiction would have to be applied here. I don't think there's any favoritism, any real distinction between a government agency as a licensed suppliers or another commercial participant in the market.
No areas where we may not be able to effectively use one of our regulations because it's against the state agency as opposed to, say, a private company?
I didn't see anything there. Bear in mind that WSSC is here voluntarily of its own volition and presumably for its own reading of the statutory requirements as well. And I think they understand that if they obtain a license as a gas supplier, they're subject to all of the conditions that normally pertain to such a license. And I also think that the commission probably would be well advised to just simply include a reminder to that effect in whatever order it issues granting a license if it chooses to do so.
Okay. So just a few more questions, and I appreciate everybody's indulgence. In the event that there's a need for the commission to investigate and potentially proceed with some type of enforcement on this license, what's the applicability or even the effectiveness of our existing enforcement authority under statute? Are we able to utilize that against another state agency?
I think the commission can and does on occasion utilize its enforcement authority on state agencies. I mean, it's unusual, but probably not unheard of. In terms of WSSC, I think it would again apply as to any other licensee in those circumstances. I do note that there is one specific provision in WSSC statute that gives the commission jurisdiction in a limited circumstance on over WSSC rates, and when they're here under that provision, the same rights pertain to them as to another party before the commission.
Right. And that section of the statute gives a fairly specific authority to the commission. But just your interpretation that in the event, and again, as I said earlier, I wouldn't expect anything like this, but one of the things lawyers unfortunately do all the time is have to think about all those corners nobody wants to go into. So just under that situation where something like that could happen, the commission would have the authority to use the same tools it would against any other licensed supplier for enforcement purposes.
I think that's correct, Commissioner.
Okay. All right. I guess finally, I'm curious about what staff's thoughts would be about the precedent this would set. WSSC is a bit of a unique state agency. They're effectively a sister state agency to the commission. We're both established in the same statutory article. Is it possible that we could see other state agencies also seek licenses?
It is possible, but unlikely. WSSC, it really depends on the enabling statutes of the individual agencies and whether they would even contemplate or permit such a thing. WSSC, for example, has a provision in their enabling legislation that lets them engage in essentially ancillary and incidental activities to their primary business, which is what this would probably fall under. An agency like OPC or MEA, for example, would not have that kind of authority in its enabling legislation. So, and I think that it would be, that's a fairly unusual thing. You might find it with respect to some local governments, but, or maybe other quasi-governmental agencies, but it is unusual that they have that particular authority.
Okay. All right, thank you, Mr. Spivak and Mr. Bugelmans for returning on behalf of WSSC. Mr. Chairman, that concludes the questions that I have. I know you haven't called for a vote yet, but I'm comfortable proceeding with a vote in the event that you wish to do so.
Thank you, Commissioner. Very probative questions, looking in the dark corners in the case of some type of eventuality. Thank you. Commissioner O'Donnell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wanted to ask staff about the section of the buck sheet regarding complaints. It says the company is a water and wastewater state agency. Customer complaints are handled internally and are not related to the energy service industry. So that's looking back, but looking forward, would complaints under the auspices of this license that we may issue now come to our Consumer Affairs Division?
It's a fairly unlikely circumstance, Commissioner, simply because, presumably, if WSSC does as they have said they intend, which is limit their audience to other state agencies, would be unlikely, but theoretically, at least it is possible. And, again, that's a function of being a commission licensee. You would have to, the commission would be obligated to address complaints that come under the license. It still would not have any ability to address complaints under WSSC's primary business with respect to water and sewer service.
Right, nor would we want to, I would think, to take on a whole new scale of that type of complaint, but specifically regarding complaints under the services provided, the broker services, whatever services are provided under the license that we're considering here, we would have full authority under our existing regulatory structure to investigate and even have sanction authority, I would suppose, for complaints that do come under the purview of the license. Is that right? Is that your understanding?
That is my understanding, Commissioner.
Yeah, it's a little scary to me. I'm not sure there's any other arrangement. Government, maybe it does exist, but as Commissioner Linton indicated, I suppose I'm ready to proceed here, but this is so unusual. It does make me uncomfortable. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That's kind of all I had.
Thank you, Commissioner. Any additional questions?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner Richard.
Yeah, I'm just interested just to hear a little more about how the gas is produced, Mr. Bugelman. You said it's through a process that occurs. Is it through the wastewater treatment facility, or I'd just be interested in a little more information about that.
Sure. I think for that question, Commissioner, I'll pass the virtual microphone to Mr. Wilson, if you could provide some background info on the facility.
Great, thank you.
There. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
What is the process is basically a digester plant. It's a sewage digester plant that is being installed in Piscataway, one of the wastewater treatment facilities. So what's going on is there's also a cogeneration plant being installed there as well, and the digester makes about half of the potential gas that site may use. And that gas is renewable natural gas. And the intention is to actually sell that renewable natural gas to a party that uses it in transportation. And that way, we can gain extra benefits that helps pay for the cogeneration plant and overall reduce the cost for WSSC. Beyond that's all it is. It's a digester plant.
Okay, so this is a unique capability of WSSC.
It's an extremely unique capability. The only other site that is close to that I'm aware of in Maryland is Baltimore City and the plant that they have out Eastern Avenue.
Okay, so, and even the product you would say is probably unique as well. It's a renewable gas and probably has a special customer out there for it.
Yes, it requires, in order to gain the value that helps reduce cost, the gas needs to be consumed by a transportation fleet or in transportation use. So that's highly limiting on the type of customer that might even be able to use it. So,
okay. And is this qualified for any RPSs that you're aware of, renewable portfolio standard credits, renewable energy credits?
Well, interesting question. If you were to direct that gas to the cogen plant, then the cogen output would likely qualify for RPS. It would look like a biomass plant gasifying something. Or
right.
It can be sold to for transportation use, and it can then gain credits for RINs in the federal market. And that's what's really its highest and best use is actually used in transportation. So we're better to supply market gas to the site and sell the renewable gas. And long ago and far away, this was actually a very similar thing to Sparrows Point and Bethlehem Steel, which I actually set that one up long ago. But it was a similar buy-sell type arrangement that we had to do.
Great, thanks for that information. So this is all happening in Piscataway, Maryland, too.
Yes, it's in Piscataway. It's actually a very interesting project, and we're glad to be part of it. We're glad that WSSC came and found us and asked us to help.
Yeah, sounds great. Well, thank you, Mr. Wilson, for answers to my questions, and thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, could I ask a question?
Commissioner Herman.
Thank you. So, Mr. Bugelman, just to finish, just to follow up on Commissioner O'Donnell's questions, by requesting a license from the Public Service Commission, does WSSC then agree to the jurisdiction of the Public Service Commission with respect to this license and all that goes with it, sanctions, complaints, everything else?
I think that's exactly correct, Commissioner. WSSC does. You know, if you look at the COMAR provisions that relate to the regulation of licensed suppliers, the requirements apply basically to any supplier that's licensed by the commission. The expectation always has been, if a license is required, WSSC, for the limited purpose, obviously, of the license, would be subject to the complete jurisdiction of the commission.
Okay, thanks very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Seeing no additional questions from commissioners, I will move that with respect to this item number 4, that we grant the Washington Suburban Sanitary Commission a license to operate as a natural gas supplier in Maryland for the customer classes and service territories applied for and recommended by staff. Direct WSSC to file notice to the information in its application. The vote begins with Commissioner Herman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to vote aye. I think looking at the statute, a gas supplier is a person, and a person can include other entity. So I think that with respect to, while I understand and appreciate the difficulties here, we've heard that WSSC is agreeing to be subject to the jurisdiction of the commission for the purpose of the license. So I'm going to vote aye, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Linton.
Aye.
Commissioner O'Donnell.
I vote aye, Mr. Chairman.
And Commissioner Richard.
Aye.
I vote aye. The motion is approved.
Mr. Chairman, items numbers 5 and 6 are low-income subscriber requests submitted by Common Energy LLC under the Community Solar Pilot Program. On this item for staff, Annette Garofalo, for the company, David Bugelmans and Malcolm Bliss, and for Office of People's Counsel, Bill Fields.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman.
Ms. Garofalo.
And commissioners. These are a little bit different, and so if you don't mind, I'd like to take them separately, but quickly. So Common Energy, one of these is acting on behalf of the Unified Community Connections, and they are requesting low-income subscriber qualifications for UCC's 41 housing facilities, which are located within the service territories of Potomac Edison and Baltimore Gas and Electric Company. Only persons in need, as determined by the Maryland Department of Health, Development, Disabilities Administration, are eligible for UCC housing. And residents of those facilities must be granted a community pathways waiver for which eligibility to participate in Medicaid is a prerequisite. And under COMAR 2062-0303D1, the Commission may establish alternate means aside from income verification or participation in the Maryland Office of Home Energy Programs Assistance to verify the status of low and moderate income subscribers. And as you are aware, by letter order dated February 14th, the Commission found that self-attestation plus proof of participation in Medicaid was sufficient to qualify as an alternative means to verify LMI status. The Medicaid program has an income threshold of 130% of the federal poverty level, and UCC is, because it's registered as a long-term support and service provider with the Maryland Department of Health, Developmental Disabilities Administration, has been deemed eligible to be placed in a community pathways waiver as a requirement of residents, and as a requirement for placement in the waiver, a resident must be eligible for Medicaid. Verification of Medicaid eligibility entails not only self-verification, because the information must be given to the to UCC, but it also requires annual examination of each resident's Medicaid eligibility. These facilities will use 426 kilowatts of community solar and PE service territory and an estimated 162 kilowatts of community solar and BGE service territory. And staff recommends the commission find that residents of UCC's facilities as listed in the instant application be qualified as LMI subscribers in the community solar pilot program under the commission's order. And if you'd like, I can go on to the next one.
Yes, please, Ms. Ruffalo.
Yes, so Community Energy, Common Energy LLC is also acting on behalf of preservation of community housing and requesting low income subscriber qualification for the Washington Gardens facility in Hagerstown, Maryland. The COMAR defines low income and also describes moderate income. Washington Gardens is required to verify the income of its residents annually, and income is limited to 60% of the area median income. Washington Gardens consists of 100 residential units varying from 1 to 4 bedrooms. The Hagerstown-Martinsburg metro area in the American Community Survey includes Clear Spring, Williamsport, Hedgeville, and Keedysville. The Census ACS 1-year survey reports that the median household income for Hagerstown-Martinsburg metro area was $59,800 in 2017. Those are the latest figures available. With its application, Common Energy submitted an extended low-income covenant, which is the chartering document for Washington Gardens. And Section 4.3 of the document requires HOA to ensure that all residents of the facility will have incomes at or lower than 60% of the area gross median income, which in the case of Hagerstown is less than the median income for Maryland. And for this reason, staff recommends that HOA be qualified as requested.
Thank you, Ms. Ruffalo. Ms. Ruffalo, if I could ask you to
Absolutely.
Thank you. We'll hear from Office of People's Counsel.
Thank you, Your Honor. Bill Fields for the Office of People's Counsel. We filed letters on both of these applications and concerns in a previous application along the same lines. It was an issue with the development of the community solar program, the ability of these developers of these projects to market and sign up low-income customers as part of these projects. And that has been an issue that's continued and in some respect been problematic throughout. And I think we have a general concern that this sort of exception or this one segment of serving the low-income customers may expand to take up more of a piece of this pilot program than it really should. Applications here today, one has already been approved, and there's 2 more on next week. Specifically with respect to these 2 applications, we have made we've made recommendations. We don't have an issue with them qualifying customers with low incomes. However, they are commercial class customers, and there's a whole other segment of low income actual residential class customers that this pilot is really supposed to be aimed towards and measuring how that's going to work. But with respect to these 2 particular applications, requested that the commission direct that the applicants commit to passing on any savings directly to the residents and to also provide document to a reporting requirement in order to assure that the benefits of these arrangements are actually, in terms of cost savings, are actually going to flow to the residents of these facilities. With that, thank you, Your Honor, and I'd be happy to.
Thank you, Mr. Fields. We'll next turn to counsel for Common Energy, LLC.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. David Biegelman is this time on behalf of Common Energy. I have with me virtually Malcolm Bliss, the Vice President for Partnerships at Common Energy. We have nothing to add to staff's presentation and urge the Commission to approve these requests. I would like to take a moment to briefly respond to OPC's filings on both these requests. We've reviewed the filings, and respectfully, we don't believe that there is a basis here for the Commission to depart from its previous rejection of OPC's position. As we've discussed before, and I think OPC acknowledges, the Commission has rejected OPC's proposal multiple times, first in the initial rulemaking in this that set up the community solar program, and then with respect to subsequent LMI housing provider requests that were before the Commission. And we just don't see a basis to depart from that here. In addition to the inequity of treating these LMI providers differently, we'd be concerned about imposing additional logistical burdens on these providers. As the Commission's well aware, a primary purpose of the community solar program is to benefit the LMI community. And the fact of the matter is that many low-income individuals live in housing provided by entities such as these. And I just think another set of requirements would create a barrier to entry for these providers. So we respectfully disagree with OPC's position. We urge the Commission to approve both requests as recommended by staff. Again, we're happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Biegelmans. Questions for Mr. Field. Mr. Biegelmans just cited the fact that OPC's position did not prevail during the rulemaking session. I recall my colloquy with Mr. Auslander last May when we had the Elkton Housing Authority case being developed by Ingerman before us. And it was clear that this decision to allow these LMI providers to qualify. In the Ingerman case, we were only assured that 51% of the customers would be low or moderate income. Here, we're getting assurance that 100% of the customers in both projects for items number 5 and 6 would qualify for low income status by a number of metrics. The way I see it, this is OPC's third or fourth bite at the very same apple. What has changed since our Ingerman ruling that would justify granting the conditions that you seek for these two items?
Your Honor, I can't point to anything specific with respect to these two items that's different from those circumstances. However, our concern along these lines has just remained, and the apple is we're getting more and more of these apples, and which could be viewed as a separate issue, but prompted us to continue to raise these concerns.
Thank you, Mr. Fields. I just do recall having a lengthy exchange with Mr. Auslander regarding the complexities of unscrambling a very complex egg in the event that a credit is flowed through, but rent is then increased by double the amount of credit. There is no way for this commission to oversee or certify those results. And based on your admission that nothing has changed since our last ruling, I do support staff's recommendation. I'll turn to my colleagues with respect. Item Commissioner O'Donnell.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I want to ask the staff or somebody, if anybody can answer, what is the approximate dollar value of 175% of the federal poverty level? Does anybody have a sense of what that is?
Because that's a federal guideline, it varies by household size. I did look that up last night. Let me see if I was smart enough to write it down on my notes. I can send you that chart. It would be, however, it would be lower than the amount that is the median income for the Hagerstown area.
You anticipate where I'm going with this level of questioning. I apologize for the feedback. I want to compare what the area median income consideration for low income is compared to what most other standards are, either 130% or 175%, depending on what we're talking about. Can you give me just a sense? I'm not going to hold you to it, but a sense of what that difference is?
I can't, but I can tell you that I looked at that moderate income is 62,000 for 2018. This is in the state of Maryland. And so this is, I would say, to the extent that you're looking at precisely at the what is the requirement as opposed for the housing facility as opposed to what are the actual incomes of those residents of the facility. It is lower than what they are moderate income for sure. And I think this was a hard one because the statute does seem to combine low and moderate income together as a class, and LMI, and we have actually spent some time talking about LMI together. But it's possible that not all of them qualify, that some, but not all qualify as low income.
Sure, you're on mute.
I don't doubt the legal qualification. I'm sure they meet the legal standard. I'm just trying to understand the policy implications of the difference in income levels. So I probably should have looked that up myself, but it just struck me that when I think of low income and what I can vaguely recall about federal poverty level incomes for an individual, they're much lower than $60,000, much lower. So I'm just trying to get a sense of that, what we're approving here or considering here.
Do we have additional questions from commissioners? Seeing none, I am prepared to make a motion with respect to item number 5, that we find the preservation of community housing Washington Gardens facility at 1000 Security Road in Hagerstown, Maryland, to be qualified as a low-income subscriber in the Community Solar Pilot Program. And with respect to item number 6, move that we find that the residents of the facilities identified in the Unified Community Connections application qualify as low-income subscribers in the Community Solar Pilot Program. The vote begins with Commissioner Herman.
Aye.
Commissioner Linton.
Aye.
Commissioner O'Donnell.
Aye.
Commissioner Richard.
Aye.
I vote aye. The two motions are approved. Mr. Secretary.
Mr. Chairman, item number 7 is Baltimore Gas and Electric Company's 2020 STRIDE program semi-annual report. On this item for staff, we have Michael Dean and Kobe Anayam. For the company, Daniel Person, Daniel Marcus, Colin Tidings, Kevin Nelson, John Frayne, and Lynn Fieri. And for Office of People's Counsel, Patrick O'Loughlin.
We'll begin with staff.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. Kobe Anyanam on behalf of staff. On August 3rd, 2020, BGE submitted its calendar year 2020 mid-year report on the status of projects approved by the Commission on December 18, 2019 for recovery through its STRIDE program surcharge in 2020. BGE have been able to work with Baltimore city officials in 2020 to arrange mutually agreeable work hours to continue strike projects located in the city. Based on the locations of the project, BGE have been granted reasonable work hour permits that have allowed the asset replacement work to continue at an acceptable rate, while taking into consideration city traffic and maintenance concerns. This still remains a temporary agreement between the city and BGE. Baltimore Gas and Electric Company's 2020 semi-annual strike status reports elaborate on the progress the company has made in the first half of the year, taking into consideration delays to main abandonment and retirement work caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. The pandemic has prevented the full abandonment of gas main work because residential customers are reluctant to allow BGE and contractor crew entry into their homes for service transfers. Despite these challenges, BGE aims to complete the removal of 6,700 pre-1970 3/4-inch high-pressure steel services and to abandon the full complement of mains proposed in the project list by the end of 2020. BG&E has already replaced 3,464 pre-1970 3/4-inch high-pressure steel services identified through the company's service replacement program at the time of the filing. On August 26th, BGE filed STRIDE semi-annual report additional information, mail log number 231601. This additional information was to notify the Maryland Public Service Commission about BGE's intent to expand work on Catonsville Phase 9 to accommodate a request from a local jurisdiction to complete work simultaneously with planned work by the jurisdiction. In order to coordinate with the Baltimore County's upcoming paving of Inglewood Avenue, BGE is electing to extend the scope of Catonsville Phase 9 to include additional gas replacement work within Baltimore County's paving scope. BGE estimated that the extension of Catonsville Phase 9 would result in 4,300 feet of low-pressure cast iron main being replaced at an approximate cost of $1.9 million. BGE further states that the inclusion of this work extension does not change BGE's year-end goals for retirement of outmoded assets or expected total cost. BGE will adjust the scheduling of other projects accordingly to accommodate Catonsville Phase 9. Staff concludes that other BGE projects should not be adjusted to accommodate Catonsville Phase 9's extension within expected year metrics previously approved by the Commission. Staff does not object to the additional Catonsville Phase 9 scope. However, any additional expansion work not originally approved by the Commission on December 18, 2019 should be completed outside the approved STRIDE 2020 work. Staff recommends the Commission to know the filing and to reject BGE's notice to expand work on Catonsville Phase 9 and require the company to complete all additional work outside the approved STRIDE 2020 project list. I'm available for any questions.
Thank you, Kobe. Very good to see you. It's been quite a while.
It's been a long time.
We'll turn to Representative Baltimore Gas Electric.
Morning, Mr. Chairman. Can you hear me all right?
And Mr. Herson.
Okay, great. Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. Daniel Herson for Baltimore Gas and Electric Company. I'm joined this morning by several of my colleagues. There's Kevin Nelson, who's our manager of project execution, Dan Marcus, who's a senior engineer, Colin Tidings, who's manager of reliability programs, and John Frayne, our director of regulatory strategy and revenue policy. Mr. Chairman, before I get to our STRIDE mid-year report, I just wanted to take a minute, if I could, and address two recent serious events that occurred in BGE's gas service territory. First, thank you. First, I believe this is the first time we've, as a company, have had an opportunity to appear before this commission on a gas-related matter since the tragic incident on Labyrinth Road in Baltimore City last month. This, by any description, was an horrific event, resulting in loss of life and property damage. And I just wanted to say on behalf of the company that BGE and its employees continue to keep the families of those impacted by that tragedy in our thoughts. That area of the city where this event took place is not one that has the type of outmoded materials of the kind that BG's STRIDE program is targeting. And the investigation indicated that the incident did not involve BG's equipment. But nevertheless, I want to assure the commission that BG is committed to continuing to work with Baltimore City Fire Department officials and the ATF as necessary to help in their full investigation of that matter. And second, we have received the commission staff engineering division's report on the Stanford Boulevard incident in Colombia from August 2019, as well as the commission's show cause order that was issued yesterday. That incident, although thankfully did not involve any injury or loss of life, was still a very serious incident given the impact on the property and the surrounding community. We're still reviewing the show cause order, but I want to assure the commission that we will respond in a thorough and timely manner, and we are committed to working with the commission to take the necessary proper steps to prevent a similar event from ever occurring in the future. So in closing on these matters, please know that BG takes both of these events very seriously, and we are committed to assisting in all efforts to make our gas distribution system even more safe and reliable so that these kinds of events will not occur again. Now I'd like to turn to our STRIDE mid-year report. I'd first like to thank staff for its always thorough analysis on our STRIDE filings. We always appreciate their feedback, and we will work to improve on any deficiencies or shortcomings identified by staff so that we can maximize overall value for our customers. Despite the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic, I'm very pleased to report that BG has maintained a high level of productivity in the first half of 2020. Through the date of our mid-year filing, BG had completed 58% of planned main installation and 62% of projected service work for the calendar year, all while spending 56% of the 2020 STRIDE capital budget. These figures demonstrate that we are indeed producing the value we projected for our customers and getting targeted assets off of our system. But as we noted in our filing, work this year has not been without challenges. Through the first 6 months of this year, BG retired around 10 miles of outmoded gas main, often constrained by our ability to access the homes of our customers due to COVID concerns. We as a company take our customers' health concerns very seriously, and we've been honoring their requests regarding access to homes, but this admittedly slowed some of our progress in fully retiring gas main as planned in the first half of the year. But since the mid-year report was filed on August 1st, which is not even 60 days ago, I'm pleased to report that we have been able to retire an additional 12 miles of main because customer willingness to provide BG crews with access to the homes has improved. And we hope that this trend is going to continue for the remainder of this year, but of course we're cognizant of the continuing health risk in the community since the virus is still present. I mentioned earlier that we had completed 58% of new gas main installation in the first half of the year. As some crews were not permitted to move forward with service replacements due to customer access concerns, we were able to pivot and turn that situation into an opportunity to install more gas main, which is why we are ahead of pace on new main installations. Our COVID strategy has really been about focusing resources where we could be most productive during this pandemic. In so doing, we've accepted the risk that the timing of projects could be materially different than what we had previously communicated before the pandemic began. And in some cases, this has actually occurred. But this flexibility has allowed us to take advantage of lower traffic and reduced work restrictions in some areas of our service territory, which also led to higher than normal gas main installation performance. On the proactive gas service work, the good news is that we're making outstanding progress this year, and we're on target to actually replace nearly 1,200 more services than we initially planned. This is due in part to our redeployment of resources during the pandemic, as well as lower reactive service replacement numbers in the first half of the year. That in itself is good news because it shows in part that the STRIDE work we have been doing these past years is working. And crews that would normally have been responding to reactive leak work on services or installing new business services in the first half of the year have actually been deployed instead on the proactive service replacement work, which is really helping us get ahead of our pre-1970 3/4-inch high-pressure steel service work for this year. Now, regarding low-pressure system replacement work, I'm very pleased to report that across our portfolio of gas division work, and really largely driven by our STRIDE projects targeting cast iron main, we're making substantial progress on low-pressure asset reduction. We've retired 24 miles of low-pressure main so far in 2020, 4 low-pressure regulator stations, and we've reduced our low-pressure service population by more than 4,000 services. So I want to assure the Commission that we remain laser-focused on low-pressure asset reduction and will continue to do so throughout the remainder of this year and beyond. Finally, I wanted to address, if I could, Mr. Chairman, the 2 concerns that staff raised in their comments. On the request to add the work to Ingleside Avenue on the Catonsville Phase 9 project, we believe it's appropriate to propose to include that additional work in our 2020 STRIDE plan because it's the exact same kind of asset replacement work that's taking place on the Catonsville STRIDE project that is geographically contiguous to the proposed extension area. So really, it would just be an organic extension of the Catonsville Phase 9 project. Also, we're trying to accommodate a request from Baltimore County to coordinate work with their plans for street paving in that area to minimize disruption to residents. So it just made a lot of sense from our perspective to wrap this additional work into the STRIDE program because it really is an extension of an existing STRIDE project. Now, staff does not object to the extra work getting done, but they don't think it should be part of STRIDE this year because it would alter the scope of the Catonsville Phase 9 project metrics as was approved by the Commission back when we proposed it in our 2020 STRIDE project list at the end of last year. We understand staff's position, but in our opinion, the desire to bring a proposed change to the Commission regarding the scope of a previously approved STRIDE project should not in itself disqualify that scope change from being included in STRIDE. That being said, we could treat the extension as a separate and distinct STRIDE project, giving it its own line item on future filings to keep it distinct from Catonsville Phase 9, which perhaps might address staff's concerns. So from our vantage point, it seems appropriate and reasonable to include this extension in our STRIDE plan for this year. So we would respectfully request that the Commission approve our request to add the extension to the STRIDE project. And then on the staff concern about increased spend this year, I can state that the majority of that increased spend, really almost 65%, is due to BGE performing more work on the service replacement program, as I mentioned earlier. So customers are actually seeing more asset replacement work for the extra dollars being spent. The rest of the increased cost is attributable to a variety of factors, including ongoing extra security needed for certain projects, as well as an increase in traffic control and paving related costs. I can say that we are trying to get ahead through contractor and procurement management on those issues in order to better control costs in those areas in the years to come. So in closing, is there room for improvement? Yes, of course. We are always and will continue to look for ways to control costs and improve our forecasting. But all in all, Mr. Chairman, I would submit that we're doing a pretty good job so far this year in the face of some pretty trying circumstances regarding the pandemic. So with that, I will hand back the microphone and the BG team is available to answer questions. And I really do appreciate your allowing me to address the Commission at length this morning about these matters.
Thank you, Mr. Obviously, with the recent incident at Labyrinth Road, despite the utility not having involvement apparently in the cause of that, there's been renewed focus on infrastructure replacement and safety across the state and particularly in the BGE service territory. I'd like to spend a minute with just some questions regarding the Catonsville Phase 9 extension and get a better understanding from staff as to why it's not reasonable to expand the scope at this semi-annual update in order to allow BGE to include this additional extension in its STRIDE portfolio. Could you explain that to me? Because the buck sheet at the very end of that discussion didn't quite provide that explanation. microphone is off.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Staff's position is not to dispute the addition of work to Catonsville Phase 9. We just don't think that it should be part of this year's scope, for the reason that in the past, when the commission had approved the company to do extra work, they would have to take some other projects off because the works get approved at a certain cost and a certain scope. So in the past, when things like that have been allowed, so there's a precedent for that. In the past, when things have been allowed, is because they take other projects off. We feel that in allowing the company to add extra mileage and extra amount to the scope, we're gonna run into a situation where the companies come to the commission on a yearly basis to roll a portion of stride work into rate and add additional projects to the project list. And we don't think that that's a precedent that we're willing to, encourage at this point. We already have an issue where on a yearly basis, the company exceeds, the budget that they have for, different projects. And we think that this is just going to be an extra way the companies add more, more money in.
I appreciate the cost containment argument. Although here we're not discussing a brand new project. Right. We have 45 some odd projects on the project list, and this is an extension of that. Is staff's position purely cost, or stated another way, is there any reason where staff would allow an amendment or an addition to the project list mid-year? Is there any circumstance where staff would permit that?
I don't think there's a precedent that's ever been allowed. Going back to stride, I don't think there's a precedent where a company has been allowed to add additional work plus additional money midway through the project list too. So the answer to that is we've never had this situation before. So okay. This is kind of like new territory for us, and we just felt it's a combination of really cost plus the fact that in previous years the company has not been able to, in our view, complete their entire complement of work while overspending. We just feel like this could be done. It just doesn't have to be done as part of the stride work for 2020.
Let me turn to Mr. Hurston for a moment. Mr. Hurston, so this project was originally estimated as $3.8 million on the December last year's list. It looks like $1.9 million has been spent to date. The updated cost is now $4.5 million, but am I right to assume that does not include the extension cost for Catonsville 9?
I'm actually going to have to ask Mr. Nelson to answer that question if I could.
And I'm looking at the big spreadsheet that you provided on August 3rd. So that's where I'm getting these numbers from. Okay. Yeah, I don't think we include, he can correct me if I'm wrong. I don't think we included the extension in those figures. So it would be incremental to that because the county approached us at some point, within this year, asking us to coordinate with their paving plans. So that was not included in the mid-year. But Mr. Nelson can correct me if I'm wrong with that.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Kevin Nelson for BG. I can confirm your assumptions.
Okay, thank you. That would make sense. So the expansion would cost another additional $1.7 million. It appears that you started this project back in April. Estimated completion without the expansion was September 1st. Has the project without the extension been completed?
Final retirement is scheduled for next week. We are maybe 95% complete on the original scope.
Commissioner Linton only lives a few blocks away, so he'll check on that for sure. What will you do in terms of BG&E? Will BG&E continue with the extension regardless of whether or not the commission includes this in the stride scope? Or will the project and not? proceed with the extension?
No, we'll continue with the project. We want to honor the request of the county. It makes a lot of sense to us to not have to open the ground twice. They want to do the paving on that avenue. We're going to try to do the work while they have the ground open. So it makes sense for us to move forward. So we're going to do the work. It's just that, that we thought it made a lot of sense to include it in STRIDE. We're replacing the same kind of assets. It's a geographic extension of a project that's already approved. There's really nothing different about it other than we're adding the additional footage from the Ingleside Avenue.
No, I appreciate that comment response. I also appreciate staff's adherence to keeping the project list clean and respect for precedent. My colleagues, if they have questions, Commissioner O'Donnell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a few comments and then maybe a question or two. But one, I wanted to applaud BG&E for their approach they're taking in the STRIDE program again, with regard specifically regarding low pressure replacements. You take it seriously. You say you're laser focused, and it's clear to me. It's called out in your submittals. It's easy to find. And obviously, the company is pursuing this in a way that this commissioner certainly appreciates. I had another utility. We had another utility before us recently who took the approach to low pressure. My continuing squawking on low pressure, if you will. They took the approach of, well, if you tell us to do it, we'll do it. Otherwise, quit squawking. I didn't. Someone said they would watch that particular part of our AM when that was presented, and they swore they saw little puffs of smoke come out of my ears, signaling a brain explosion. But of course, I jest. But I think it's so important to focus on this low pressure main, and I think it's important to be done without being told, to be honest, without being ordered, as part of your general obligation under your franchise agreement to supply safe and reliable service. And I think you would agree with that. And so that's what made me have such a visceral reaction to, you have to order us to do it before we'll take it seriously from another utility. I disagree with that completely, 100%. The utilities have an obligation to provide safe and reliable service, in my opinion. And I wanted to add that commentary along with my thanks to BG&E for your taking this very seriously. Now, with regard to the Catonsville Phase 9 extension request, there was nothing more frustrating when I was an elected official than to have a newly paved street and have a utility come behind it and rip it up after it was newly paved. And I know that's a complaint of the citizens. They have to live with that for a long time until it gets back on the cycle again for repaving, and it just doesn't make sense. To the extent you're going to coordinate with the local government, I applaud that. But let me ask this question about that extension. That's all low pressure main, is it not?
Yes, the additional work is exclusively low pressure. And I want to say 99% cast iron.
Cast iron and low pressure, cast iron category, low pressure service. I think it's important for the commission, Mr. Chairman, that being the case, to signal our ability to be flexible with these kind of adjustments and to continue to support the low pressure main replacement. I do not agree with the inflexibility. I appreciate the staff's position with regard to cost containment for sure, and I'm usually a hawk on that sort of stuff myself. But in this instance, to signal the commission's flexibility and recognition of replacing low pressure main, I would support allowing this adjustment as BG&E requests going forward, notwithstanding staff's well-reasoned arguments to the contrary. So that's kind of where I'm at. I wanted to ask that question about that being low pressure main. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner. Any other commissioners? Commissioner Herman?
I'll let Commissioner Lynn go ahead. I'll follow.
Okay, sure. Thank you. And good morning again. I had a question for a couple of questions for BGE and for staff. On the Catonsville extension request, can you tell me if the extension portion was scheduled to be, or were there plans to conduct that work at a later period of time? Or was it something that was just, I understand that it was accelerated because of the opportunity and coordination with the county. But in the event that didn't happen, where the county was not there, and the STRIDE project proceeded as normal, was there plans to do the exact same work in a future STRIDE project?
I would say, sir, that strategically, yes, noting that we were on working phase 9 of our Catonsville replacement efforts, and 10 having already been completed. So it would have come up for replacement in terms of progressing the low pressure pipes off the system in that area in the next few years. I will further add that Baltimore County's paving policy would have imparted a moratorium of 5 years. And were we not to perform the work now, we would be obligated under their requirements to fully repave the road. And so, not only is this opportunistic, but it also avoids some additional future cost.
Okay. So for the staff, I understand that there's concerns regarding this modification of the originally planned STRIDE project. Is the staff aware of these types of opportunities before the company proceeds with them? Is there like a communication line between the company and the staff, or is this something that you find out after the work's already been halfway completed? You're muted.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. Well, there wasn't any communication. The first we ever heard about it was when BG&E originally filed for the extension work. So, we were kind of just like everybody else, we were caught by surprise by the additional work. And again, staff's position is not that the work should not go on. They're still going to go ahead and do the work. We're just saying that it should not be added to the approved original project list that was filed back in 2019. The work is still going to go ahead, as scheduled, by BG&E. We just don't feel like it has to be added to the project list. They could do that outside STRIDE, and the job is still going to get done. So we just want to make sure that our position is clear. We think that it's important work, especially because we're talking about low pressure systems and cast iron, and we all know how dangerous that stuff could be. We're just saying that it should not be part of what was approved back in 2019.
Okay, so if the staff is able to get, and I haven't talked to the company about this obviously, but if the staff is able to get some information in advance, even after projects have already been approved, so that you're at least aware of the fact that these types of opportunities have presented themselves, so that there's, as the company acknowledged already, is potential cost savings. There's and as staff has already acknowledged, the opportunity to get some of this low pressure cast iron steel out sooner rather than later, especially a few blocks from where I live at. Is it something worth, is the staff's position flexible enough to at least understand that there may be, might be a unique opportunity to take advantage of it?
Again, I'm just a small portion of the engineering staff, so whatever I say here has to be subject to what John Wachowski and what John Clemmenson think. We think it's opportunistic in terms of the timing of it, and the Baltimore City coincidentally doing pavement work. We think that is a good opportunity to certainly go in there and get the work done. We're just we're trying to be careful with companies not coming in after approved project list and adding the extra work, extra cost to a particular scope and work that have been approved on the back end of the previous year. We don't want to run into a situation where we have yearly rate cases because extra work has been added and extra money's been apportioned. That's the only concern we really have. But in terms of the job being done, we are with BG&E. I think it's important work and opportunity is there. So, you know, it should be done. We're just a little bit cautious about the costs and the yearly rate cases.
Thank you. So, Mr. Herson, any response to the staff?
Sure. Yeah, I think those are great points Mr. Onyanam's raising. My response is a couple points. I'm trying to remember whether we did do this before or not. And I'm thinking back to the early days of Stride 1, and I thought there was an instance where we added a project or deleted a project from the list. And my recollection, again, you know, this is several years ago, so I may be a little off, was that Mr. Clemenson had requested that we bring these changes to the commission through the administrative meeting process. So, you know, obviously we want to communicate with staff as much as possible, but my recollection is that they wanted us to formally bring these through the admin process so that the commission had full transparency of any changes on the project list. And the other distinction I'll make in this case is this wasn't the situation where BGE on its own volition decided, you know, in the middle of the year, hey, let's add this extension to the project list. This was in direct response to the request from the county to add this footage and mileage to the project so that we could coordinate with the paving plans that the county had. So, Mr. Chairman, you know, maybe it's a distinction without a difference, but I think we're trying to be responsive to the needs of the county and the concerns of folks in the Catonsville neighborhood. This wasn't a situation where we just decided one week, hey, let's add this project and added cost and mileage and go to the commission. So I think there is a little bit of a distinction here.
Thank you, Mr. Herson. One additional question regarding the comments earlier about the temporary agreement that exists between the company and Baltimore City for paving. What's the, I'm curious about why it's phrased as a temporary agreement. Are there some other issues that still need to be addressed, or is this a matter that we could conclude has been resolved at least enough so that we can look forward to the Stride project being completed timely?
Yeah, it's interesting. You know, we identified the issue last year for the first time that we had with the city on this. We've actually done a pretty good job and had a pretty good relationship with them this year in coordinating and getting the necessary extensions as required to get the work done. What we haven't been able to do is get them to commit to having those extensions in place for a period longer than a couple months at a time. So we have to continue to go back to them, talk about what we've done, you know, what our plans are for the next few months, and then they've usually been willing to continue the extension, but it hasn't been for more than a few months at a time. So that's why we continue to call it a temporary situation. But I don't want to leave the commission with the impression that we're having difficulties with the city on immediate projects, because we're actually getting a lot of cooperation from them. But I'll ask Mr. Nelson to supplement my remarks if necessary.
Yeah, I'll just add that the intent that has been expressed to BGE from city officials is that they want to get a full year cycle and see if there's any seasonal impacts and things like that that might impact a decision for some permanent arrangement. So that's all I have to add. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you for answering my questions and for keeping us updated on the circumstance with Baltimore City. I'm hopeful that it will continue to work out positively. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Commissioner Herman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, I wanted to ask staff if is the issue that BGE didn't take another project off? Would you have a different view if BGE had taken a $1.7 million project off of the Stride list and sort of, you know, so that it's more closer, you know, it's a dollar for dollar change? Would that have made you more comfortable?
Yes. In the past, at least with the commission, that has been the precedent that when a company wants to add, you know, more projects or more footage plus monies to the scope that had been approved in the prior year. They take something off and then we substitute. And we discussed this at length, in the division. We've had issues where even without all these things being done, the companies are constantly overspending and in some cases not completing the full complement of work. So it's just a balancing act where we just felt like if this has to continue with precedents that have been set in the past, they have to take something off and then substitute in order to do this expansion for Catonsville Phase 9.
Okay, thanks. So does it provide, it sounds like, I think I heard Mr. Herson say that because of the COVID situation and the pandemic, that it's unlikely they're going to spend their full 2020 budget. Did I hear that correctly, Mr. Herson? That that you're behind, understandably because of issues. So do you anticipate spending your full budget in 2020, or do you anticipate being below it?
I think it's still a little too early to tell, Commissioner Herman. I don't want to say that we're going to be way under or way over at this point. I think, our plan is still that there's still a chance we could land on target, especially if we continue to see an easing of customers, not granting us access to their homes. But, there's still a chance we could end up a little bit more for some of the reasons I mentioned earlier. And of course, because we were doing more of the service replacement work, actually getting more services replaced this year, that has a price tag associated with it that might put us over the estimate that we filed back in November 2019 when we weren't sure we were going to be able to do that many services. But it's just a little too early to say for certain. But I do want to address Mr. Anyanam's last point there, is that I think we're actually able to, when we say shift other projects to accommodate Catonsville Phase 9, I think, again, Mr. Nelson can keep me honest here, but I think we were actually looking at projects that might otherwise have delays anyway this year. So it wasn't a situation where we were actively displacing another project to accommodate Catonsville Phase 9. It was actually a situation where we were taking an opportunity to plug maybe a hole that was created because a couple of our other projects, because of some local and municipal delays on permitting, that we would actually be able to fit this project extension in.
If I can add to Mr. Herson's comments, essentially our target for for our replacement and our expenses this year within our main replacement, what we call Operation Pipeline, is unchanged from what we provided to the Commission in our November filing last year. As we did disclose in our mid-year, we expect some of those costs to be marginally higher. I want to say order of 2% for the program for the year. But this is not a driver of that. We are still intent on getting the 48 miles of main retired to the extent we are able to schedule those services. So on a net basis, our proposal is not to increase the work, if that makes sense.
Okay, so my question then for Mr. Herson or whichever BGE gentleman would like to answer. Mr. Herson, you said that, hey, we're here, we're doing it, this is a logical extension, and this is exactly the kind of work that the other STRIDE projects are, the kind of work that was, that's in STRIDE. But don't you already do significant other work that would be qualified for STRIDE? You're still doing that as well, are you not?
Yeah, yes, we are. Yeah, we certainly do the same kind of asset replacement work outside of STRIDE in our non-STRIDE programs. And
okay, so
like I said earlier, we're going to move forward with the project to accommodate the county's request. And if the Commission does not allow us to include it as part of STRIDE, then we would do that under the non-STRIDE.
Okay, so is it simply the proximity of this that makes it why you believe it should be part of STRIDE? Because it's, because you're already there, and so you're, is it the proximity? And how far would that proximity go? If it were 1 block over, would that be sufficient proximity to put it in STRIDE versus doing it as part of your standard asset replacement?
I think proximity is a large part of the request, and so is the fact that it's the exact same type of asset. I mean, we're literally on the same street, the same cast iron pipe, just another few hundred feet or whatever the mileage is. Those are really the drivers here. If it was a project that was, you know, several blocks away or a mile away, I don't want to say that we wouldn't make the same request, but in this particular case, Commissioner Herman, it just seems very logical to us to make that an extension of the project that was already approved.
So what's your response to staff's concern that this is kind of like a foot in the door here, that this is a $1.7 million project. So on its face, it doesn't look like, a really big change at 1.7 million, out of the, much larger 2020 stride budget. But does that mean that next time we're going to see we're already on this street, so now it's 5 million, and then the next time it's 15 million? What's your response to that? We're concerned about, opening this door.
Well, I don't think that by including this in accommodating our request in this instance, that you're necessarily binding yourself to a determination that every time a gas company comes to you with an additional project that's geographically contiguous, that you have to include it in stride. We're not asking for that here, and the commission has discretion and jurisdiction over all these project decisions, in terms of what gets in stride and what doesn't. So if you decided that, in this case, it's reasonable, the cost isn't too material, we can approve it here, but maybe not in the case of, if it was 5 million or 10 million more, or a certain percentage higher than the overall spend for the year. I don't think you're boxing yourself in with the decision to allow us to do it in this case.
Yeah, and I guess my other question, and I'll finish after this, Mr. Chairman, but geographically contiguous, I mean, these projects are always going to have some geographically contiguosity, if that were a word. There's always, because it's a system, and so it's all connected. So you've got geographically contiguous. I mean, just like all these phases, you're in phase 9, phase 10 is going to be geographically contiguous, but phase 10 isn't in the stride project list. So I'm not sure I'm asking you for a response, but the contiguous nature of it to me seems to be potentially problematic if that's the basis for granting it. That could set a precedent that says that we can continuously start adding on to the stride projects.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I understand. I just think in this instance, we're talking about our crews literally stopping on Ingleside Avenue on a particular block and saying, okay, we're done with the stride part of this. Tomorrow we start the non-stride part of it down the street. It just made a lot of sense to us to make it an extension of Catonsville 9. That's why when we submitted the request in August, we included at the end of the letter the revised map of the project site and the revised metrics, basically making it so as if we had proposed the entire project back in November of 2019, the exact same information that we would have provided had it been included at the beginning of the calendar.
Right, and you're not suggesting that you're going to change out crews because these are stride crews and these are non-stride crews or anything like that. Everything, those people are just going to keep going.
Yeah, that's my understanding.
Because of the paving. So it's not, and I appreciate, and I very much appreciate that you would continue to do the work, and I'm delighted to hear that you're going to continue to do the work. I'm just, I think staff has some valid points about, opening a door, and then where do we shut it? And that's, I think a valid point. So thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Commissioner Richard.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Herson and Nelson. I don't really have many questions. Most have been asked and answered so far, but I did want to ask about the spending variance for 2020. When you state that it's 65% due to the increased work on service replacement, Does that mean we should anticipate, if that work is done, that in the future years we won't see the same kind of annual spending variance, or how should I read that as far as overall for this Stride 2 cycle?
Well, there's a finite number of those particular services on our system. And I think we've said that our plans were to have those completely off the system by the end of 2023. And again, my colleagues can keep me true on all of these comments. I think, to the extent we're able to get more of them done this year, Commissioner Richard, then obviously we don't have as many to do in the remaining years of Stride 2. So I can't say that we would continue at that same pace in 2021 with corresponding additional costs, because we may not need to. But let me ask Mr. Marcus or Mr. Tidings to comment on this in terms of whether we have any indication right now about what our 2021 plans are for that particular asset. Looks like we lost Mr. Marcus. Mr. Tidings, are you still with us?
I am here, yes. Thank you. So our plans, really, as Dan, Mr. Herson mentioned, the finite population here is the key. We had an approach to balance that reduction over the next several years. This year, we saw an opportunity with the resources available to make more headway on that population that's at risk. So all that's going to do is offset future work, really. The question as to what next year would look like, I don't have the particulars, and it looks like we might have Mr. Marcus back. But what I can say is on the balance, 21 through 23, we would see our spend level would be coming down to reflect that we've front loaded this population reduction in this year and previous years to where we're ahead of that population more so than we originally thought. And I'll turn to see if Dan has any further, if Mr. Marcus has any further comments.
Yeah, hi, Dan Marcus, BGE. Sorry, my connection cut out for a moment there. And yeah, Mr. Tynes, I heard, I think most of what you said there, and I agree that this is just a movement of when those 3/4 inch services will be replaced, to this year out of the rest of the Stride 2 period. So it's not a net change in number that will be completed. It's just advancing the work to get rid of them, take them out of service earlier than initially forecast on our project list filed fall of last year.
Okay, so as a cost driver, now that you've completed these services, you don't expect to have that same type of cost driver that would increase your variances in the future years. Is that basically the answer I'm hearing?
Right. So, and maybe to clarify slightly, on a cost per basis, we're right within 1% of what the project list indicated. So the cost of variance is purely a function of volume. So, to the extent that, we will obviously take into account our productivity this year when we submit a project list for 2021 and, forecast to the best of our ability how many we'll be able to finish in 2021. Yeah, it is a variance in total amount, but it's not a variance in cost per, So does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think so. I think it gives me a better understanding. And then finally, just more of a comment. I just wanted to actually say that I commend the company for working with Baltimore County. It's good that type of communication takes place, and it seems like a logical thing to propose. So I personally support the Catonsville 9 expansion scope. So anyway, that's all, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. It's somewhat surprising that we spent the bulk of our time today just speaking about an extension of one of the 45 some odd projects on the list. We did hear compelling arguments by both Mr. Herson and Mr. Anayam regarding whether or not to include this Phase 9 project in Stride. I think we've heard that this project is going to get done regardless. It's just a matter of will it be booked as a 2020 Stride project? Not. Commissioner Herman also raised a very good point, in my opinion. regarding the slippery slope if we open this door. I am sympathetic to the utilities' desire to include this in the STRIDE project. What I am going to do, and I don't know how the vote count will shake out on this, but I'm going to propose one comprehensive package of motions accepting BG's proposal for Catonsville Phase 9, but capping their 2020 STRIDE plan to no additional changes for the remainder of this year. I would also ask that the utility, notwithstanding the fact that you've been asked to place these on administrative meetings, to still work with the engineering staff to the extent that you foresee any changes that require an amendment to the STRIDE program. From our engineering staff, they do hew to precedent, and in most cases either would warrant a removal of a project to accommodate a new one. So with that, I will make this package of motions, and if it passes or if it fails, I'll make another. So I move that with respect to item number 7, that we
actually, Mr. Chairman, can I just ask the reason for a cap? I mean, if there were another situation that comes along before the end of the year, such as the expansion of Catonsville 9, I mean, would that mean that we've already pre-decided, or just help me understand the purpose for the cap?
Well, the cap is in staff's proposed recommendations here. It's obviously without prejudice to the utility coming forward if there's justification to remove the cap at a future date.
Okay, thank you. So it's without prejudice. Thank you.
Without prejudice. And I'd like to say that all of our, most, if not all of our decisions are without prejudice for an applicant, whether it be utility or some other interested party to come forward at a future date seeking redress. So with respect to item number 7, I move that we note the filing, that we accept BG's proposal to expand the scope of its STRIDE work on the Catonsville Phase 9 project, and that would require any additional work that was originally approved by the Commission on December 9th, 2019 to be completed outside of the approved STRIDE work for 2020 project year. The vote begins with Commissioner Herman.
I apologize, Mr. Chairman. Could you state the motion one more time?
I'm happy to do so. I propose that we, number 1, note the filing. Number 2, accept BG's proposal to expand the scope of its STRIDE plan to accommodate the extension for the Catonsville Phase 9 project. And third, require that any additional work that was not originally approved by the Commission on December 9th, 2019 be completed outside of the approved STRIDE work for 2020.
I'll vote aye on that, Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner Linton.
Aye.
Commissioner O'Donnell.
Aye.
Commissioner Richard.
Aye.
I vote aye. The motion is approved. Thank you. Before we adjourn today, there is one programming note. In Baltimore Gas and Electric's multi-year rate application in case number 9645, we have our third and final public comment hearing tomorrow night at 6 p.m. Interested members of the public may seek to participate and question the utility regarding any concerns with that rate application. That will also be live streamed on our YouTube channel at 6 p.m. tomorrow evening, September 17, 2020. With no additional matters on today's Commission's agenda, this meeting is adjourned.